Will the sponsor yield?
In the case you yield.
So I just want to kind of go over parts of how this will work. So if a petitioner goes into court to get an order of protection and an emergency order of protection, and the emergency order is granted and firearms are to be relinquished, I just want to confirm that there will be no avenue for the respondent to transfer those firearms to anyone in the family.
This is consistent with the fact that there is not an avenue for that under plenary orders of protection within the Illinois Domestic Violence Act.
I'm sorry, could you say that again, please? That's where I'm going. Yeah.
So currently, where we have confusion right now, currently under the Domestic Violence Act, there is no provision for transfer of ownership. So this is consistent with the current Domestic Violence Act.
Okay, so currently, if an emergency order is granted from a judge, what happens to the respondent's FOID card?
Yeah. The FOID card is to be surrendered.
Suspended, correct?
Surrendered and suspended.
Suspended, correct?
Surrendered and suspended.
Okay, and your modification to this would make that any firearms that respondent has in their person at the time, which is now illegal for them to have because they have a suspended FOID card, they must transfer or relinquish those firearms to the sheriff's office.
Yes, to law enforcement consistent with current law in the Illinois Domestic Violence Act.
Semantics is what you're playing here. So what happens to, so currently, just for everyone in this chamber, I deal with this daily. Currently, when an order of protection, an emergency order of protection is granted by a judge, the respondent has the ability to fill out a firearms disposition sheet and transfer his or her firearms to another legal gun owner who has a valid FOID card. You are taking that avenue away. So my question then is, in my firearms collection, I have numerous firearms from my grandfather that have been in the family for generations. Under your idea, is there any avenue for me, if I was a respondent in this case, to transfer those heirloom firearms to my son?
Currently, what is in practice is not what is stated in the Illinois Domestic Violence Act. What we have proposed is is the same as what is in the Illinois Domestic Violence Act. If you are an abuser and the exigent circumstances are determined by the judge that it is unsafe for the survivor and their family, for their abuser to have guns, then yes, they will have to turn them in to law enforcement and they will not be able to transfer them.
Okay, so in your scenario, where was the due process in accusing me and finding me to be an abuser?
Can you repeat that question?
In your scenario, you said that if that was me in that position and I was a danger, I was found to be a danger and shouldn't have those firearms because I was an abuser. In that scenario, I'm asking, where is the due process that gave me the right to defend myself before you automatically, arbitrarily decided I was an abuser and my firearms must be surrendered?
While petitioning for an emergency order of protection, the exigent circumstances of the danger to the petitioner and their family members is the due process for the judge, is an exception. Let me correct that. The exigent circumstances, meaning the danger to the survivor and their family is an exception to due process and allows the judge to issue the firearm order.
So in that, the FOID process is purely administrative, correct? Do you understand that? Purely administrative, simply by the emergency order being signed before any evidence is ever submitted from the respondent, because in an emergency order, it's only the petitioner giving their side. So there is no respondent side, and once that emergency order is filed, the FOID card is automatically suspended. So it's all administrative. You do know that, right?
Your question is?
Where's the due process?
I answered that.
No.
The exigent circumstance of an emergency order of protection allows the judge to grant the firearm order.
From one side, without any evidence presented.
And as you know, as the process works, there is a return for the plenary order after an emergency order has expired.
I do know. And do you know that once that administrative order has happened with the FOID card, it will be a year at best before the FOID card is reinstated to that respondent? And in your bill, you believe that law enforcement should have those firearms. So I want to kind of move on from this now because we're not getting anywhere. We're just kind of spinning circles. So at what point in time does the respondent get their firearms back that we as the sheriff's office have been holding for a year?
At the end of when the order expires.
When the order expires. Okay. So you had said earlier that there was no evidence that there would be an exponential increase in firearms held by a sheriff's office. Is that correct?
It's a case-by-case basis. It's all dependent on...
back to those. Okay. Well, for the record, you did say there was no exponential evidence to show that there would be more firearms being held by a sheriff's office.
There is not, because of the case-by-case basis.
But the case-by-case basis turns into 100% of cases.
Not every case, as you know, not every case has a firearm remedy issued.
But every OP filed voids the FOID. It is to be surrendered and suspended immediately.
That is the status quo. That is not what this bill addresses.
Okay. All right, so let's move
The bill
on.
addresses the firearm remedy component.
Okay, let's move on.
Representative,
So,
we're going to implement a 3-minute time limit.
so open and honest debate is not what we're here for, Mr. Speaker. I understand. Duly noted.
I didn't
So
say that.
let's move on, ma'am.
Representative, we're going to have a 3-minute time limit. People can give you their time.
I understand that. Thank you. So let's move on. Is there anything in here that, for all of these firearms that the sheriff's office is going to have to be in safekeeping of while this process moves on? And I will tell you, it will be a tremendous amount of firearms. The bigger the county, the more firearms based on population. There's more OPs coming through the big counties than there are the small counties. But my question is, all of our evidence lockers right now are overflowing full. There is no room to put things. So my question is there any money in this for local sheriff's office to expand their evidence rooms to hold these firearms?
There is no appropriation in this bill. We acknowledge that storage is an issue for law enforcement, whether it be FRO acquisitions or evidence keeping, as you are saying. There are avenues available to law enforcement through the Safer Communities Act, through LDGF, cannabis revenue, and I will state on the record that I am here to help in the future with any ideas you may have.
Well, I'm familiar with all of those avenues you're talking, and they are difficult to maneuver, and I would love to have a conversation with you off the record on how I can come up with more funds for my sheriff's office. So let's move on, and let's say that we've taken these firearms, and because I don't have room in my evidence vault, and there's no funds for me to add on, I have to go rent some sort of a Connex storage trailer to put out back to put these firearms in. So after we go through the process, the 2-year plenary order runs out, the respondent reapplies for their FOID, which is going to be another year at best. We're 3+ years down the road. Who's responsible for the damage to these firearms that's been sitting in a moist condition for 3 years that are now, once was prized family heirlooms, now are rusty chunks of iron? Who's responsible for that?
There's nothing in this bill that speaks to that, but there is civil liability currently for civil liability immunity for law enforcement, as you should know.
I'm sorry, please say that again.
The bill does not speak to this, but currently there is civil liability immunity for law enforcement.
Okay, civil liability, but at the end of the day, that respondent still has a rusty chunk of metal, and who's to blame?
Representative Ugasti yields 3 minutes.
That wasn't a question. What's your question?
I still go back to, never mind, strike that. Well, I will end with this. In all of this discussion, I also heard that you were on the record saying that you trust law enforcement, and I think that that is a great step forward for you, and I will hold you to that as we move on. This bill, to the bill.
The bill.
This bill was not well thought out. There are unintended consequences in this bill, or maybe intended, I'm not sure, that are going to harm the law-abiding gun owners in this state. There are just so many flaws in this. All I can do is urge a very firm no vote, and hope we can stop this today. Thank you.
Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, you'll yield.
Thank you. Representative, I've got a couple questions to start with. Is there any part of this legislation that will prevent illegal gun sales on the streets of Chicago?
The bill does not speak to that.
Okay, so once again, we're dancing around the real issue of keeping guns off the streets of Chicago. Is there anything in this bill that will prevent attorneys or judges to plea out gun charges when used in a crime?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Sure, I use it often. Is there anything in this bill that will prevent attorneys or judges to plea out gun charges when used in a crime? So often we hear an individual uses a gun in committing a crime, but yet the gun is plea bargained out, which reduces the charges on that individual. Is there anything in this legislation that fixes that?
That is judicial and prosecutorial discretion.
Okay, so the answer once again is no. To the bill, we continue to throw the gun bills out here, but yet we're not fixing the real issues. The real issues is the crime on the streets of Chicago. Once again, we're not punishing the criminals. We're going after the law-abiding citizens who have a FOID card. That FOID card has gone through a deep process through the Illinois State Police. Everyone's vetted. We go through a process. We're vetted through federal records. We're vetted through state records. But yet, once again, we're attacking the individual who has the guns in their safes at home. And I would urge a no vote. Thank you.
Representative Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just kind of shaking my head here. I'm hearing a great deal of heartfelt concern about the poor abusers and their precious guns. You're talking about somebody who has been deemed to be an immediate danger to someone's life. Getting rusty ain't getting dead, people. Let's remember what we're trying to do. We are trying to prevent death. I am a survivor of domestic violence. Y'all ought to be ashamed of yourselves.
Representative Davidsmeyer.
Thank you, Speaker Hoffman. Will the sponsor yield?
Indicate you yield.
So, the purpose of this is because of an immediate threat of danger, an emergency, correct?
Yes.
And in the bill, we give, the original bill, we give law enforcement 48 hours for this emergency order to go and get the guns. 48 hours, correct?
Yes.
And if they don't collect the guns in 48 hours, what happens?
In an amendment that we adopted on the floor, the parameters are set out for law enforcement. If they cannot reach the respondent, then they go back and make a report, and the issue goes back to the judge.
So if they don't get it in after this emergency order, they're given 48 hours, which is 2 days. And if they can't get it, they send a note to the judge saying, we tried, but we couldn't get it.
Currently, that is much better than what is in practice right now.
Wouldn't it be better if the person immediately transferred it to some other member of their family? Immediately?
You need to give service of the order, which is required within 48 hours.
I'm speaking to the emergency, right? There's an emergent situation. We are worried about the safety of this individual. We're giving them 48 hours plus additional time if they ask for it. Right?
In an emergency order, the respondent is often not in court. So we are putting parameters for law enforcement to follow for when they need to reach the respondent so that the respondent can comply.
Yeah. So the police can confiscate. Okay. So you mentioned, what'd you call it, a gun task force or firearms task force?
A firearm insurance task force.
Firearms? No, not that. There was a group that you said got together to come up with bills like this.
Our working group.
The working group. Who served on that working group? Do you know? Were you a member?
Representative Davidsmeyer, Leader Kiker yields 3 minutes.
Thank you, Leader Kiker.
I am a member of the working group.
How many members were on that working group?
9.
How many of them are members of the majority party?
This is a Democratic working group. You are free to have Republican working groups.
Did you have anybody, or any of those members, gun owners?
Yes. Democrats are gun owners too.
Not many of them, but unfortunately not many of them. I would appreciate if more of you would exercise your rights and stop trying to take away mine. This is an opportunity for. My concern is that this is an opportunity for people who don't want someone to have a gun to go after them. Please vote no.
Representative Calkins,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
indicate you yield.
Thank you, Representative. How many orders of protection, emergency orders of protection, I believe is what we're talking about, expire without the defendant being, I guess, put in a permanent order?
That data, I would be very interested in being able to compile that data. It is not publicly available.
So is there anything in your bill, and a previous speaker talked about not being concerned about victims of domestic violence, which isn't true, by the way. But we're also concerned about the rights of an individual and their property. So if an individual is not purported to be an abuser, but it turns out that that's not the case, that this is unfounded, is there anything in your bill that ensures that they get their guns back in a timely fashion, returned?
That is already in the current Domestic Violence Act. We are not touching that part.
What is that then, please? Because I'm unfamiliar.
They would show up with their valid FOID card, and their weapons would be returned to them. If they do not have a valid FOID card, they may even show up with someone at the end of their order, and if it has been unfounded, they may show up with someone else with a valid FOID card, and their weapons can be turned over to that person.
Pardon? Then you're just transferring them at the end of the 2
Right.
years. Why not
So,
on the front end?
all right, I'm a little distracted. I
Yeah.
apologize. So if a person is charged with domestic violence and gotten an emergency order of protection against an abuser, alleged abuser, and that emergency order of protection then goes back for adjudication and is unfounded, all of the person has to do is show up with somebody with a FOID card, because they're not going to have their FOID card. It was taken as soon as the order was written, and the Illinois State Police then revokes or suspends their FOID card. So all they have to do is bring someone into court with a FOID card, and they can get their weapons transferred to that individual. The sheriff then must give those weapons back to someone with a valid FOID card.
Let me understand that you're talking about an order that has expired, so it's no longer
It's an emergency order
there.
that allowed the judge
The emergency order is no longer valid.
Right.
It was unfounded.
Correct.
Then that is what is in current law today, yes.
So all I have to do is show up with someone, and I have a FOID card, and the judge is going to give me their weapons.
I have answered that question.
So why not allow
Representative, would you like additional time?
that? Somebody want to do
Representative
that?
Wilhauer.
Fine, thank you. I won't take the full 3 minutes. I appreciate it. So why not allow that to happen immediately on the front end?
Because immediately there is danger to the survivor and their family. What you are talking about is the danger is no longer there. The order is no longer standing. It has been unfounded. So in your situation, we follow the current law.
But this is what confuses me. Because as soon as someone's FOID card is suspended, they have to dispose of their guns immediately. As soon as my FOID card would be suspended, I have to get rid of any guns. And I have to give them to someone who, in the current law, says I cannot have access to. I can't give it to my wife and just say, hey, here's the form, I gave it to my wife, but I still have access to the code, to the safe, or the guns are still in the house. I mean, the law is very clear that when a person loses their FOID card, they must immediately dispose of any guns they have. Under this, as you heard from Sheriff Tipsword, you have 48 hours. And then if you don't do it, you could have another who knows how long. Wouldn't it be better to allow the transfer, immediate transfer, out of my possession, immediately?
You wouldn't know unless you were served. You need to be served with the order.
But
And you are not there during the.
I understand. But when a person's FOID card is suspended, what action do the Illinois State Police take?
This bill is not speaking to that. That is already in statute.
I understand. No, I understand that. But it's the process that we're talking about. And we're trying to, I guess, help you understand that there is a better way to do this. There is a better way to protect victims of domestic violence. We're trying to make this better.
Representative, this bill was driven by the experiences and knowledge of victims of domestic violence, the folks who are intimately involved in this process. And I will let them speak for the policy.
But it's not driven by law enforcement. It's not driven by people who have experience with how guns are transferred and how things are handled. You're imposing something that needs to be made better. And this is a flawed system. Mr. Speaker, to the bill.
The bill.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, this part of this bill is not going to do what needs to be done to protect victims from an abuser who has a gun. We can make this better. We can do this by demanding that the current law be followed, that immediately that weapon, a gun, all guns, immediately transferred to an independent party so that the abuser would not have access to them. There's also nothing in this bill that demands that these weapons, these guns, be cared for. There's nothing that protects someone from getting or makes it sure that someone is going to get their guns back if they are adjudicated to be innocent. We need to do a better job of protecting victims of domestic violence. This isn't it, and I urge a no vote.
The final speaker, Leader Cabello.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
The bill.
Ladies and gentlemen, this bill is not supported by any law enforcement at all, excluding the, I believe, Cook County Prosecutor's Office. Law enforcement has a lot of issues with this bill. On Tuesday in our committee hearing, I asked the representative during their working group who was there. She had said it was a Democratic working group. I had said, why don't you include us? Why don't you include us? Because what you're doing when you do just one side or the other is you're forcing us to vote no, because we have no ideas into this bill. None. This side of the aisle is no longer the party of no. I'm dead serious. You can laugh all you want, but we are not the party of no. We are the party of wanting to work together, but you're not letting us. I'm tired of this. Representative, I told you that there's very few things that I wouldn't work on. This is one of the things that I want to work on. This side of the aisle also supports the victims of domestic violence. For us to sit here and tell everybody that your side of the aisle or our side of the aisle is against something all of the time from here on out is idiotic. When we can work together, you know what? This chamber can do some really good stuff. Really good stuff. But until we work together, we're going to have these kinds of fights. You're driving a wedge between the people of the state of Illinois and everybody else. Other people have ideas too. Some people have some really damn good ideas. It's time that you listen. We may not agree, but you know what? We're willing to work. Our leader, Tony McComey, has said, we are no longer the party of no. Let us show you. And the only way that's going to happen is if you include us.
Representative Hirschauer to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill was driven by the voices and experiences of survivors of domestic violence and their families. This bill is focused on getting guns out of the hands of abusers and dangerous people. The intersection of intimate partner violence and gun violence is deadly. Like all gun violence, the ripple effects of these intimate partner gun violence situations echo far beyond the intimate relationship. They affect children, they affect the community and the people who witness it, family members, and coworkers. Today, we have an opportunity to strengthen protections for survivors and their families. And we have an opportunity to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous abusers. I want to thank the amazing domestic violence community who has stood strong through this process and worked hard on this bill. We see you. Most of us in this room see you. And we stand with you. I ask for your aye vote.
The question is, shall House Bill 676 pass? All those in favor signify by voting aye. All opposed, nay. The voting is open. Have all voted a wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record. On this question, there are 70 voting yes, 36 voting no, 0 voting present, and this bill having received the constitutional majority is hereby declared passed.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.